ethanol industry faces several roadblocks, and in particular we hear a lot about the RVP relief, or the vapor pressure for blends higher than E10. Then you also have what we call the MUSE model, which is the motor vehicle emission simulator that the EPA uses to evaluate the emission effects from ethanol in the vehicles. Then you're also looking at like the R factor, which is this mileage calculation issue that is really a failure in science. And then you have the F factor, which is the flex fuel vehicle credits. And the flex fuel vehicles are going away today in production levels. And then the underlining issue is the fuel blending, because that has touched just about every aspect of the ethanol industry in creating test fuels that do not represent real world. And this is primarily controlled by the oil industry. And so those are some of the key roadblocks we're facing in the market today. The RVP issue today, the read vapor pressure of the fuel, is created when EPA only allows that for E10. Today we're asking for the vapor pressure to be extended beyond E10 to higher blends of ethanol. And it's ironic that when we do that, we're lowering the tailpipe emissions by doing that, and also evaporative emissions. So there's an environmental benefit of extending the waiver by allowing E15 to displace E10. And ironically, EPA only has the authority to do this, to limit us 3 months out of the year, which during the summertime is actually the most important time to be offering these higher octane blends such as E20 or higher, is because that's when your vehicle needs the octane the most. So it doesn't appear to have a lot of logic. It's political in this whole vapor pressure issue, and it could be extended today just by reinterpreting the law. The MUSE model, which stands for Motor Vehicle Emission Simulator, is impacting the ethanol industry because every state in the U.S. has to use this model to determine their inventories on emissions from motor vehicles. The key problem with this model, though, in the MUSE model is that it's the data going into the MUSE model. It's when EPA tested these 15 vehicles and 27 fuels, they relied on the oil industry experts to help them blend these 27 fuels to make ethanol look worse. And so if we can correct the inputs to the MUSE model, we can reverse the negative issues, because today EPA models E15 to be worse than E10. The roadblock of the R factor is probably not well known, and it's probably even harder to describe, but it is basically a carbon equation for when we calculate mileage. And so when the auto industry wants to use higher blends of ethanol, this correction that the EPA is imposing actually penalizes ethanol. And it's to the point today where the auto industry is certifying their vehicles twice, once on E10 for emissions, but on E0 for mileage. And it's unfortunate because the DOE and the U.S. Auto Alliance have both pointed out the error in the science that EPA used. And instead of EPA fixing the science, they have said, well, we need more years of data. And so it's frustrating when you can't fix the science, is when we talk about all the other issues, is how do we fix policy? The roadblock pertaining to the F factor is the fact that it's going away. It is the FFE credit for the auto industry to produce FFEs. And you could simply go to any GM dealership today and find that most pickups, Suburbans, and most of their cars aren't even FFEs today. And so the autos are stopping the production of FFEs. And again, a lot of it has to do with the burden of certification costs, but the credit is going away. But we also see that the FFE credit is important for the future vehicles when we want to look at higher octane, because that's a short-term pathway for the autos to get more vehicles on the road approved for higher blends in the shortest amount of time, as we develop these higher blends of octane with blends such as E20 or E30. The roadblock of the fuel blending over the last 15 years is probably one of the most biggest key issues that the ethanol industry has not been aware of. We can go to dozens of studies and look at how the test fuels were blended, whether we talk about this match blending where they supposedly match properties and they're not, or some studies that don't even have any detail of the fuel properties. And you look at the basic properties provided in these studies, and you just see clearly that they're blending a worse fuel when they're adding ethanol. And that's just not real world. We can show, based on the dozens of studies we have, how we're being penalized every day by not just tailpipe emissions, but also evaporative emissions and material compatibility. So it's time to start talking about what is real world fuels and how do we make test fuels look like that. Well, there's several pathways, several options we can take to expand the market. But one of the ones that I think of right away is having a new certification fuel, this higher octane E30. We've already have the ability to put that proposal in today. This allows the autos a better range of fuel properties to not only calibrate the vehicles for the current fuels, but when you can calibrate for an E30 rather than all the way up to E85, they can make some significant efficiency, which again comes to mileage improvements, simply by giving them another fuel such as E30, and that's just simply adding ethanol to E10. Well, a positive step forward, I believe, is getting the ethanol industry collectively together and saying, where do we need to either generate the science or even represent the other side of the science, like life cycle analysis, the corn upstream emissions, downstream emissions, and articulate the value of ethanol, both from the food versus fuel, what we're doing in protein. But it really takes the ethanol industry together to bring the pressure on like these issues with the EPA or updating the GREET model. It can't be done by individuals. It really needs to be done as a collective group.